The Russian government maintains tight controls over the information that the Russian public gets about the war in Ukraine. Just what happens, though, when the delusion of the Russian media confronts the reality of the battlefield? One Russian soldier in a leaked Telegram video describes his experiences on the battlefield. We're going to be breaking it down right now, guys. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. So this is... we'll just take a look.
Я позывной Фикса, Веснин Олег Николаевич. Сейчас, пока птичек нету, сидим, отдыхаем, спрятались. Бежим, не знаю куда. Мой номер жетона АВ 067 865.
So this is interesting. So when he says birds, that's usually a reference in this war, at least, to drones. And we know that Ukraine has been relying very heavily on FPV drones in its defensive fight against Russian forces. This sort of blend of reconnaissance drones and attack drones, FPV drones and bombing drones, it really creates a lot of tough situations for Russian infantry. Notably, the Russian forces here are... well, you notice where he's hiding. He's hiding in a tree line in foliage. This is one of the areas where Russia has found its troops are actually the safest. The reason is because FPV drones do not have the maneuverability or, I think, latency to weave through these small branches, right? And observation drones struggle to identify specific targets within them. The only problem that Russian troops often run into, and this is true of Ukrainian troops, right? Russians have all of these tools and are using essentially the same tactics, right? Let's say, for example, I'm using this as a hypothetical. We can try to look up where the 83rd Assault Brigade is, but let's say he's fighting, let's say in this area here, right? Or actually, that's Ukrainian help. Okay, you can see here that oftentimes in Ukraine, the windbreaks are very narrow. And so what you have is an area where FPV drones might not be able to go. But once you're stuck inside these narrow canals, it's very easy to target with artillery or other high explosives that are going to make it easy to dislodge. So essentially, Russian forces have to either be retreating or advancing. But it's a really sort of terrifying way to exist on the battlefield. Here we go. We can find where he's fighting. Boom. Here we go. 83rd Assault Brigade right here is... oh, wow. We were close, actually. So supposedly fighting near Andriivka. So in all likelihood, you can see this is like a contested zone. I would suspect that it's one of these narrow windbreaks or somewhere in here that he is hiding or trying to conceal himself, right? Somewhere in this kind of general area. But you see how tough the terrain is. And even if they could conduct this assault, remember, it has to happen across this canal, right? And anytime you're crossing a water obstacle like that, you're in danger. If you're a drone operator, you're going to watch because you're going to know there's only a few places where you can cross this canal quickly. And once you observe those crossing points, you know that you're going to be able to target any forces that cross there. It's called a choke point.
Даю обращение. Номер части Уссурийска, ВДШБ, 83-я штурмовая бригада. Даю обращение, что все, больше мощь нету. 3 дня без еды, без питья. Поддержки никакой. Взял на себя ответственность командира. Командир раненый. Мясник, ты как там? Мясник. Не могу. Сил нету, пить очень хочется. 3-й отстал, истек кровь.
Yeah, this is some crazy stuff, right? You can see these only 2 guys are surviving. Ironically, he's like, I'm the commander, which is true. In any military, there is always a chain of command in place, and usually it's discussed prior to. Generally, it's done by rank order. Whoever had rank earliest gets it, but sometimes you make exceptions. I would often make exceptions I had a couple of team leaders who had prior deployments to Afghanistan, or sometimes people had specialty skills where I said, hey, if the squad leader, you're kind of the senior team leader in this fight, right? In this for this patrol. But this kind of progressive chain of command, and even he sounds just desperate, right? And it's common for Russians, particularly on this attack. This is part, so he says, okay, no food and water for 3 days. This is actually, it sounds like a failure of the Russian logistics system, and it is, but only partially. Because remember, the Ukrainian forces have been on a campaign of interdicting Russian logistics, and you can see why, right? The Ukrainian forces are prohibited from striking inside Russia, but you can see to get this guy supplied, it looks like material is going to have to pass through Donetsk, through Luhansk City, right? There's a huge number of depots and logistics hubs this is going to have to pass through. And the Ukrainians are always watching. And thanks to ATACMS and HIMARS missiles, it's easy to destroy many of these supply depots, meaning that there's very little left that can actually get to the combat units themselves. And so this is not just a failure of Russian logistics, it's a literal reflection of Ukrainian strategy, right?
Кровью. Фара позывной. Все, наверное, нету. Наверное, умер. Сзади тоже ребята лежат. 5 300-х видел.
And guys, this is another one of those battlefield realities. You know, I criticize the Russian military for leaving wounded, and you know, as I always point out, that the Russian military currently fighting in Ukraine is essentially the third army that Russia has recruited and deployed. Russia had a full-time, well-trained, active army that suffered around 87% casualties in the first year of war. So they were eliminated. Russia recruited a second generation of usually reservists or veterans, and they have essentially been eliminated. And now Russia is into this third generation of fighters. So they're oftentimes not instilled with the military culture of looking out for your buddies. And so you end up with this kind of situation where wounded or KIA, and nobody's looking for anybody, as he says. But that said, it is a protocol, within a tactical decision-making process, right? Like as an officer and generally as a small unit leader, you're told, listen, KIA are the last battlefield priority because KIA, they're not going anywhere. So if there are wounded you need to treat, you only have limited space to evacuate, or you need to achieve your mission objectives, you have to set aside recovering the bodies of soldiers. That's why dog tags exist, because in an exigent circumstance, you may not be able to recover the body. So you take the ID tags, leave one on the body, take one with you, and you say, this is the evidence that this person was KIA, right? And you also, for even wounded, right, if you get wounded yourself, then you haven't helped the situation. You get wounded trying to help a wounded soldier. So your obligation is to establish security, and your obligation is to establish like control of the situation. You have to stabilize the situation you're in before you can help the wounded. So it sounds sort of unhinged, and it kind of is. But look, he's one guy and one other guy. As horrible as it is, do you really think him and one wounded comrade are going to be able to extract anybody safely? No. The best hope for a lot of those guys, honestly, unironically, is to surrender to the Ukrainians.
200-х лежит, все изувечены. Никто никого искать не будет. Что делать дальше, я не знаю. Ноги не идут. И жить хочется. Будем сдаваться. Все. Хватит. Может, так хоть маленько поживем. Больше выбора никакого. Ни патронов, ничего. А больше всего хочется пить. Мужики, если кто-то что-то это увидит, даже не думайте, какие контракты, блядь. Нахуй. Все, опять что-то жужжит.
Suddenly buzzing again, of course, means the drones are out looking for him. It's tough, man, to surrender. Now, Russia maintains an open frequency and a call sign. I think it's like Volga for Ukrainian forces that want to surrender to the Russians. And Ukraine, I don't know what it is, but Ukraine maintains a similar frequency and protocol where any Russian with a radio can call it and say, "Hey, I'm not. I want to surrender," right? And they'll facilitate that surrender. And the hard part is surrendering, right? So what you would probably want to do is put down the weapon and put down your gear so you don't appear to be a combat soldier. You'd want to wave some kind of white flag, an undershirt or something, right? Because white flags are very apparent and they're kind of universal. And you want to do so in full visibility of the drone. And then you gotta cross your fingers that the drone's not going to hit you. Now, the one thing the Russians have going for them is that as a condition of receiving Western aid, Ukraine's military has to follow the law of war. Now, does that mean that every single soldier is following the law of war to the letter every single time? No, soldiers are human beings in both, good and bad ways. And the reality is that but that's his best bet, is to try to just be like, listen, I'm obviously not a threat. I'm obviously surrendering. You obviously have to take me. And so I want to, and remember, every Russian prisoner of war can be exchanged for a Ukrainian. So the Ukrainians have an additional incentive to take a lot of live prisoners because they can be exchanged. Again, it's a little tougher when you sit there and go, I don't know. This dude, not a great call to put it out on Telegram where you're like, yo, I'm going to surrender. What you say is, I was knocked unconscious, and when I woke up, the Ukrainians, I was in a trench, and the Ukrainians threw a grenade, and I went out, and when I came to, the Ukrainians were in the trench pointing guns at me, right? Will Russia believe it? Probably not, but it doesn't really matter. That's kind of the best bet for someone like that. Anyway, guys, the only thing I wanted to say is, of course, if you're interested in seeing some of the actual combat footage, the actual drone footage of combat, that's available on combatvetnews.com. It's available for members only, but it's totally uncensored. It's the viral combat footage from the week. Any one of these tiers is going to get you access, but the lieutenant tier and colonel tier, we're going to introduce some exclusive benefits, but I really appreciate you guys that do support me here. This is the thing that sustains the channel. I really can't get monetized. A lot of my videos get demonetized, and a lot of sponsors back out when they realize I make war content. So I depend on you guys to keep me able to do this every day. So a huge thank you to all of you that do it, that do support me. And I'll see you over there on Combat Vet News. Thanks to the Colonel tier, Lieutenant tier. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. That really helps. See you in the next one. Cheers.